Hello, everyone, and happy Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us on our Facebook page. We are celebrating Social Justice Week here at Memphis Theological Seminary. My name is Luke, and I work here in the Office of Admissions, and I've had the pleasure to interview several groups of panelists so far this week. In a couple of minutes here, we'll be talking with Dr. Gacky and Rev Anderson about their work in housing justice. But I do want to give a shout out real quickly to the rest of the previous week. We've had panels so far already on racial justice on Monday, food justice on Tuesday, and educational justice on Wednesday. So if you're interested in learning more about the work that our alumni and students and professors are doing in those arenas, please go to our Facebook page. You can just scroll down the feed and you should be able to find it. Or you can click that button near the top that has all of our live videos and you'll see them there as well. I am actually broadcasting today from our brand new studio, which has the mission of Memphis Theological Seminary right behind me, and planted over my other shoulder, I'm doing the wrong one, is the word justice, which we'll be focused on again today. So I do want to go ahead and hand it over to Reverend Anderson, who's just going to tell everybody a little bit about herself, what she did at MTS, her role now, and of course, how it relates to housing justice. Reverend Anderson? Oh, hold on. Apparently the audio is not working again, so we'll give you just a second or two to figure that out. This is the fun part of doing virtual events, y'all, is that it's never perfect. I was doing an event like 2 weeks ago and we started and literally 30 seconds in, my internet cut out. So it's just a classic situation. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Gacky while Reverend Anderson is working on her audio. Dr. Gacky, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role and work you do around housing justice?
Great, thanks, Luke. I'm Dr. Pete Gacke. I'm the Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean at Memphis Theological Seminary, and also Professor of Christian Ethics. But why I'm on here today is not because of those roles. It's because I'm one of the directors of Manna House, which is a place of hospitality for people on the streets and other people in poverty here in the city of Memphis. We've been running Manna House for a little over 16 years. And in that capacity of offering hospitality to folks on the streets, I've gotten to learn quite a bit about the lack of affordable housing here in the city of Memphis and more broadly in Shelby County. And also some of the barriers to access to housing as people are trying to get off the streets. So I can share more about that a little bit later. But that's my connection with this issue of housing justice, is really Manna House.
Thank you, Dr. Gacky. And yeah, we'll definitely have more time to dive into the work that Manna House does and that you do with them. And of course, your role here at MTS and how all of those things connect. Reverend Anderson, hopefully we've gotten the audio to connect now. Oh, it's still not coming through.
Well, Reverend Anderson is working on now to say that Manna House and Rumini in Memphis, which she is the director of, we've worked very closely together over the years. In fact, the first place that Rumini in Memphis started placing people into churches for overnight shelter was at Manna House. So people came to Manna House for their rides to the church. And we've had that close relationship with Reverend Anderson since the very beginning. And so we both have what we've been learning from our friends on the streets is really about the lack of housing in Memphis. One of the things people, when I'm asked, why are people homeless? My answer is always they're homeless because they don't have homes. That's the only thing that's distinctive about people on the streets. There's nothing distinctive about not having a job or having an addiction issue or suffering from mental illness. The common denominator for people who are homeless with all of the rest of us is that you're homeless if you don't have a home. And homelessness in the United States is a result of the structure of our economy and the way in which we regard housing as just another commodity to be bought and sold. And so the market determines who's housed and who's not housed. And that's not exactly a good way to ensure that everybody will be housed in a way that meets their basic needs. So part of that is what's happening in Memphis right now is that rental rates, the amount of money that people pay for rent is just skyrocketing. The median apartment rent in our region rose by 19% between September of 2020 and last month. So you imagine if you're trying to afford living in an apartment and your rent has gone up 19%, that's pretty significant. And that's all market driven because it's not like there's a lack of apartments. In fact, apartment buildings are going up all over Memphis right now. You can drive down just about any major street in Memphis and see apartment construction going on. But it's because people can raise those rents and still get people to come into those rental properties. And as long as that's the case, the people who can't afford that rent are going to end up out on the streets or in very substandard rental properties. So that's one of the things that I've learned over the years from working with people on the streets is that it's a lack of housing. Lack of affordable housing that keeps people on the streets, access to that affordable housing. And Memphis, at the same time, the city of Memphis has torn down all of the public housing in the city of Memphis over the last 20 years. So there's really not public housing available for people in this city anymore. There's rent subsidized housing, Section 8 housing. But there's not the public housing that there used to be in every major city in the United States. That whole public housing effort had started in the 1930s during the Great Depression and just after, where there was a recognition that housing really should be a human right and not simply something to be bought and sold.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll have some time to dive into all of those concerns and the things that face renters and buyers. I totally agree that you drive around all of Memphis and you just see apartment buildings popping up all the time. And I'm a young renter myself. And so I usually look at what these prices are, and they are exorbitant. They are much higher than the older buildings. And even though they're newer facilities, I'm not sure how many people can afford that sort of stuff. If you're working a minimum wage job in Memphis, you're making what? Maybe $600 a week at most. And the idea that you could afford $1,000 plus apartment plus, food and gas and all of the other things that you just need to get by in a day to day is really unfeasible for a lot of people in our city and beyond. I think what worries me is that Nashville fell through this, 5 or 10 years ago and really started seeing rent hikes go up like crazy, started really gentrifying the city. And we seem to see some of those effects happening in Memphis today as well. Well, while Reverend Anderson is working on rejoining us, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, Dr. Gacky. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your journey and just how did you end up deciding to attend seminary? And then how did that bring you eventually here to us at MTS?
Well, that goes back a long ways, Luke, so I'll be able to entertain folks maybe with my story for quite a while, but I'll try to give the short version. Way back in the 1980s, I was a graduate student at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University, and a master's student. With the degree I earned was at that point was a Master of Arts in Theological Studies. It's a little bit similar to our Master of Arts in Christian Ministry. But the program I was in, I had to write a thesis, a master's thesis, and I was looking for a topic for the master's thesis. and this being the late 1980s, the religious right had been on the rise. And I was interested in the intersection between religion and politics. So I came up with what I thought was a great idea, which was I would write my master's thesis on Jerry Falwell and his theological ethics. So I went to my advisor, who was Dr. Hendrikus Boers, who had come to Emory from South Africa. And Dr. Boers was a New Testament scholar and an atheist, which is an interesting combination. But his atheism had grown out of his experience with the white church in South Africa, which had been in support of apartheid. He had actually been thrown out of South Africa because of his own work against apartheid. So he had had a pretty bad experience with white supremacist Christianity, and basically just didn't have much time for Christianity anymore in general. However, when I went to talk with him about my idea, and I was pretty excited about it, I said, Jerry Falwell, man, I really want to write about Jerry Falwell and the rise of the religious right. And he, in his kind of clipped Afrikaner's accent, which I won't try to imitate, said, why don't you write about real Christians? And I've always been a little bit of a smart aleck, so I came right back at him and I said, do you know any? And he said, well, the people who come closest to Christianity in my experience at this point is the Open Door community here in Atlanta, which is now in Baltimore. But at that point, the Open Door community in Atlanta, he said they work with people on the streets, they work with people on death row. And I think you should write your thesis about the Open Door community. Well, because of that idea from him, you don't really argue with Dr. Boers. I got connected with the Open Door community, did my research, part of which was living there. And I began to learn about homelessness and really about poverty in the Atlanta area, but more broadly in the United States. I really had a kind of conversion experience while I was there. So that's and I stayed at Emory for my PhD. So I had about 6 or 7 years of experience with the Open Door community. And so when I came to Memphis, started having conversations with some people here about what we might be able to do about homelessness in the city of Memphis. And out of those conversations, Manna House eventually emerged as a group of us got together and said, well, let's offer to people on the streets what they identify as their needs. Because my wife Kathleen and I had gotten to know some people at at Sacred Heart Catholic Church, people who are on the streets, Abe and Sarah and Tyler, and we asked them, what do people in this neighborhood who are homeless need besides housing? And they said, what we really need is a place where we can get a shower, a cup of coffee, a change of clothes, a place to be safe for a few hours. And so we opened up Manna House as a place where people could access those services, be treated with dignity, and then we'd be able to perhaps connect them to other services in the city that might actually help them move into housing.
Absolutely, yeah. What a wonderful journey to get to this point. And so you said that you guys at Manna House, you provide, showers and places for people to spend during the day. Why is that something that wasn't already set up in Memphis? What's prohibiting people from having access to those sort of resources, and what sort of needs were you guys filling?
Well, I think what has simply prevented it has been a kind of, at best, apathy, and at worst, fear and hatred towards people who are on the streets. And this is tied in, I think, to our broader culture of the attitude towards people who are in poverty, that somehow it's their own fault. And this is part of this sort of meritocracy approach to our culture, that your value as a human being depends upon how much money you have, what kind of job you have, where you live, what kind of car you drive, what kind of clothes you wear. That's your value. And so somebody who is on the streets, who's homeless, who's experiencing homelessness, they're the lowest of the low, and they're often considered beneath any kind of attention or respect, other than to be punitive, to punish them for being on the streets by passing things like anti-vagrancy laws, anti-panhandling laws, those sorts of things as ways to criminalize being homeless. So we were very much deeply influenced by the whole tradition of hospitality within Christianity. And we wanted to be a place that offered people respect and dignity and created some sort of sense of community. And all of that as a kind of, or could be a kind of launching pad for people to get connected with other organizations in the city that might be able to help move into housing. So we worked very closely with June Averett, who ran a place called Outreach Housing and Community. June is now deceased, but she was an excellent resource for people on the streets. And we were a place of connection for, she could come to Manna House, meet people, sort of assess their needs and get them connected into the limited housing resources that are available in the city. She was excellent at that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that word that you use, hospitality, that idea of radical hospitality, right? Something that a lot of Christians embrace, this idea that every single person in the world is a child of God, and that people make mistakes and they go through trials and tribulations, but that they all deserve, a home and food to eat, and just the basic elements that make us human. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Gacky. Hopefully we've been able to get Reverend Anderson and the audio
Maybe.
back going. There we go. Yay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
It's
We just got to
the
keep.
old shut everything down and start over plan.
That's right. That's
So,
right. That's
yeah.
technology. Just restart it and do it again.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, Reverend
Sorry
Anderson,
about that.
No. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you working through the troubleshooting. Would love to just hear a little bit about yourself, what degree you pursued at MTS, and then of course your current role and how that relates to housing justice.
Sure. I'm sure Pete said all sorts of wonderful things while I was away. It's all very much tied together. My time at MTS in the early 90s was very fruitful for me. I left in 94 with an MDiv degree and became a hospital chaplain. So I spent about 20 years as a hospital chaplain doing that ministry, and very fulfilling time in my life. And then I think really connected to Manna House, the students, my husband Barry is connected to the seminary community, and the students began to have those experiences at Manna House that then affected our life, our personal lives, and caused us to begin to be interested in how we could be part of that kind of community. And so the burrito ministry really directly came from experiences at Manna House, and getting to know the guests that were coming to Manna House, which then in turn caused us to build the relationships with people who were experiencing homelessness, and to see some of the needs, which at that point for my congregation at Colonial Cumberland Presbyterian Church was to realize that shelter was an issue, that free shelter in Memphis was an issue, and that there were congregations in the city that were open to finding solutions for that was done in a safe and organized way. And so we used the Room in an Inn model from Nashville to start Room in the Inn out of our congregation. And in 13 years of doing that, we have built that network of congregations to 35, up to 55 at the time of COVID shutdown. So I think that finding ways to reach out in this beautiful ecumenical network now that are building relationships and seeing homelessness in a completely different way than writing the checks and delivering and dropping off, and sandwiches. It's the relationships build a deeper understanding of the humanity that is involved in this community, and friendships that develop. So that's how Room in the Inn started, very much birthed out of all of those justice conversations at MTS and at Manna House. And so after over a decade of doing this, we have seen the gaps in services in more up close and personal ways. And our board of directors has very strategically planned to meet some of those needs. And we opened a little less than a year ago a new campus that is not only meeting shelter needs, but filling some gaps for people who are have medically fragile conditions, who very often are living on the streets, trying to recover from illnesses, only to get sicker and sicker and sicker. So we opened a recuperative care center here at 409 Ayers in the medical district area, and are now serving people who are in that condition and being discharged from hospitals.
Reverend Anderson, you cut out there for the last 10 or 20 seconds. Not sure what happened. We got most of it though, so that's good. Technology is not fun.
Yeah. One of the things that I'd say with what Room in the Inn, of course, is not only providing shelter, but they are starting to help people move into housing. I want to give one story because this is a connection between Manna House. We had a guest, I'll just call him Richard. It's not his real name, but so he had been coming to Manna House for several years. Came regularly to shower, get a cup of coffee, came to the Monday meal, Mondays, and he then he got quite. He had a medical emergency. He was actually stabbed, and wasn't doing. No, that's not him. It wasn't stabbed. But he had a medical emergency, and he needed a place to go to when he got out of the hospital. He ended up going to the respite center there at Room in the Inn. And while he was there, Room in the Inn was working with him, and he ended up being housed in one of the tiny homes that your brother, Luke, is getting built here in Memphis. And so this guest, who started as a person on the streets through Manna House and then through Room in the Inn, now he's moved into housing. And he's doing quite well. He's also working, and it's one of those like success stories that can be pointed to. It's not why we do this work, in order to just have success stories, but I think it's good for people to know that with the right kind of support and resources, people can get housed. So being on the street, being without housing is not something that's like just part of the natural order. Right. It's something we can address. Go ahead, Lisa.
I think with what we have found here is that, the barriers are just, they're immense. And for people to reach.
Oh, you cut out again. Oh no. This is so strange.
It is unfortunate. Well, she's working on that. I just also point out part of the barriers here in Memphis and in other cities is the inability to honestly face how many people are without housing in the city. And part of this is tied into the federal government and their point in time count that they do once a year. In Memphis, they do this, try to count the homeless once a year, and they can point to the numbers are declining, they claim. So, for example, in 2017, they counted 1,426 people. In 21, which is the latest count, I mean, they've just done the 22, but the results aren't in yet. there's 739. So people hear those numbers in the media and they think, oh, homelessness is disappearing in the city of Memphis. But here's the issue: is they're not actually counting everybody who's on the streets. They're not even close. Same time that they're saying they counted 739 in 2021, Shelby County schools identified that just in their schools alone, they had 538 homeless students. So the numbers are skewy.
Right.
They're not accurate, and it's tough to get a completely accurate number. But I think it was probably closer to 4,000 or 5,000 people on the streets of Memphis. So if we can't even be honest or get a good handle on what is going on, it's pretty tough then for there to be much public momentum built towards housing. And as Reverend Anderson was talking about, is that one of the things that we've learned, or how we learn, is by listening to the people who are actually out on the streets. They are excellent teachers about the barriers that they face. And so we learn from them that there's really not much affordable, accessible housing here in the city of Memphis. There are long waiting lists to get into even Section 8 housing. And part of this is tied to that people who own rental properties can make a lot more money by not doing Section 8 housing. And the Section 8 housing themselves, there's a lot of restrictions around that housing that make it more difficult for people to find Section 8 housing. So if rent in Memphis has increased by 39% over the last couple of years, if you're a landlord, you're not going to bother with doing Section 8 housing if you can make money hand over fist by continually raising your rents. So, but if you don't sort of study the issue and link it to direct stories of people who are on the streets, it's pretty easy to ignore the issue, especially if the one thing you hear is that, homeless, the point in time count is about half of what it was in 2017. It's like, it's such a minor issue, let's not bother with it. But that's the problem, is that we're not even honestly facing the numbers of people who are on the streets or who are housing insecure here in Memphis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, when you're talking about that staggering of a difference between what the count is showing and what the accurate numbers probably are, I mean, you're talking about a huge number of people in a crisis that maybe not a lot of people are paying attention to because they're not receiving that accurate information. Mm-hmm. So like you said, you mentioned that public housing, there's also some barriers to enter that. I believe, one example of that is if you have a felony on your record that you're not able to join Section 8 housing. Is there any other sort of barriers that are facing it, obviously, besides, the long waiting lines?
Those are some of the major ones. But of course, once you get into the housing too, you're going to need bedding or beds, furniture, those sorts of things. And of course, keeping the housing. So if your rents are going up astronomically and your income has remained stagnant, it's going to be pretty tough to hold on to that housing, even if once you get into it. And that's related to other structural issues within the city, that our public transportation is horrendously inadequate. And so trying to keep a job, trying to be able to get back and forth between where you live and where you work. People spend an hour or two or three working, just working the bus system, trying to work the bus system to get back and forth. And it's an easy way to end up being late for work. And you're late for work, 2 or 3 times, you might not have your job anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had the pleasure of working with the Memphis Bus Riders Union when I was in college, actually. And so we did a project where we tried to get to work on time. My family lives in kind of the Jackson area in North Memphis, and it took me well over 2 hours to get to work near the University of Memphis. So exactly like you're saying, right? Even if you get into Section 8 housing, even if you have a stability for a little while, you never know what that one little thing, maybe the bus just hits a flat tire or it's late or anything like that, that could completely throw your life off. And then all of a sudden you may be back on the street and you may be at the end of that waiting line again. And like we've talked about, there's just a severe lack of affordable housing beyond those opportunities. Reverend Anderson, you have been such a trooper. We really appreciate it. You've been battling through. You're back with us, calling in through your phone. So I want to hand it back over to you. You were discussing kind of the work that Room in the Inn does. Was there anything else that you wanted to share about Room in the Inn?
Well, I think just continuing the conversation is probably the best option, because it's all the work that having people in a place that has support around them is making a difference. And you hope that you're building something that can do that, and then you start to see it happening. And as Pete was talking about with the guest that he mentioned, just to have an opportunity to do something creative with him, that would have never been thought about before. And because there were other people helping him think through the process, encouraging him, cheering him on, he was able to make something happen that he thought was impossible. And so I think that's shelter and safety and nutrition and all of those things are important parts of what we're doing in this building. But I think those encouraging people to reach those goals that they have, that like you said, sometimes they've just given up on because the barriers are so big and the walls are so high. And so to have a staff of people just saying, well, let's figure out how to break that down and make it happen anyway. I think that's been the beauty of what we've seen, and to see, already dozens of people go into housing from their stay here in less than a year, and to hear from people that it's life-changing to have a support system. And so, I feel like that's where we are in the ministry of Room in the Inn. Our core mission will always be shelter. People not sleeping on the street. That's always going to be, we're going to keep doing that forever until there's not anybody that comes to us for shelter. And those congregations will continue to do that. But adding this component of having a place where people can get that kind of support around housing. And just a few months into this process, we realized that it's not just the time that they're here and then celebrating when they get the key and move in, that the relationship has to continue, because it's the community and that encouragement that really makes the long term possible. Because we have seen through the years people that we have sheltered get into housing and we celebrate with them, and then a few months later, all of the barriers are back, and that's insurmountable for people who are just trying to survive day to day. So having some sort of network of support around them, I think that it makes a lot of difference, and we're seeing it make a lot of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you've mentioned a few things that Room in the Inn does. You've mentioned, kind of healthcare services. Obviously, there are people who experience homelessness who have been driven to that because they have severe medical issues. Maybe they have issue paying for those medical bills or to fix those sort of issues. You mentioned obviously providing wraparound community support to give them groups to rely on, a family, a community to come back to. But what sort of other things do you guys do? Do you guys, is job placement something that you guys help with? Obviously, people who are facing homelessness, again, that we've talked about, are facing so many barriers. So what are some of the other things that you guys work on to try to help overcome those?
We love watching people get excited that it is possible to get hired. because they have an address when they're staying with us. They have somebody to ask a question about the application. They have a place to fill out that application, access to computers, and then encouragement about transportation and all of those things that are limiting. We're not taking away. There's no magic. We don't have the magic of solving all the problems, but there are day-to-day barriers that we can help them figure out a way around. And so I think that's the main thing. Employment is always something that is difficult. And the people that we serve, the guests that we serve that have lived on the street for a number of years, they may have been picked up on the street for loitering or, finding creative ways to have restroom facilities, or, just things that are on their record that then make it seem impossible to get hired. So we are able to work with some landlords and also some employers to say, we're here supporting these folks and here for them, and we would love to invite you to take a chance on making this possible for them. So we have a great relationship with several employers who are willing to do that, and we're seeing lots of people now become more self-sufficient, and it's about the financial resources, but it's also about the dignity and the feeling that you're worthy in this place. You've got a job that's making a difference. We have a woman staying with us right now. She's a cancer patient, and she has been with us during her treatment and recovery. And she had a vehicle, but she had just started a job. We helped her get the vehicle fixed as a gift, and it's been very important to her to use her first paychecks to pay room in the end back for that repair on her car. And, no matter how many times I say that's not necessary, it is very necessary for her to feel like she's taking care of what she needs to be taken care of. And because we had faith in her, now she's contributing back to this community. And just watching that be meaningful to her is beautiful every day. So she has a job that she's had a couple of different jobs. One that didn't pay so well, and she did well at, and so she's been able to move on to something that is more sustainable. And she'll go into housing as soon as one of Zach's tiny houses is ready. We're ready for her to move into that possibility.
Yeah, would be remiss if I didn't mention Homes for Hearts, which we've talked about a couple of times here. It's an effort to build tiny homes in Memphis to help overcome some of those barriers to finding affordable housing. I think a lot of people think it's an easily accomplishable thing to get into housing. But even if you're a renter, you often have to pay a deposit that's the same amount as your first month's rent. And that means having, if you're paying $1,000 for rent, having an extra $1,000 sitting around. And not a lot of people have that. People need that money to spend on necessities, again, like food and gas. And I think another consideration that a lot of people don't go through is how difficult it is to get a job. Like you've said, if you don't have an address, if you don't have a bank account, where do those checks go to? If you don't have proper documentation, for most jobs in this country, you do have to prove that you're a citizen in order to get that job. And so if you don't have your proper documentation, how do you even get your foot in the door? And so the efforts that Room in the Inn is going to again, provide those wraparound services is just incredible. And I think the efforts and the successes are being shown already. We did actually have a question coming from Facebook, so I do want to address this. We mentioned earlier, Dr. Gacky, about the students and children in Shelby County who are facing homelessness. And so we had this question come in, and would love to hear from one or both of you. What is the effect on children's ability to cope with dealing with homelessness? And then even once they come out of it, how does that kind of affect their mental well-being, their physical health well-being, and so on and so forth?
I'm going to toss that question to Lisa Anderson. And the reason I'm doing that is because Room in the Inn has more experience with families, with women and men with children. And she'd be able, I think, probably be able to tell us some stories.
Yeah, it's a huge issue for children who are unsheltered, because many times they are going from school to school to school. The numbers of schools that these children have attended is, I couldn't, you're always behind because you're always starting over. You're always in another place. So we really, day one, we're making sure that the children are enrolled in school. My favorite part of the day is when the school bus drops off the kids in the afternoon here. It feels like home. It feels like a stable opportunity. And then we're doing after school tutoring through Shelby County Schools to try to help them to maintain, but also to catch up, because I think it's probably safe to say that every child who comes to Room in the Inn for shelter is behind. We have a new family who the child hasn't been to school all year. They have not been in a stable place long enough, secure enough. So the school year is almost over, and this child has not attended school one day. So then kind of assessing, how far behind, what are the things that we can do to help them catch up? What are, is that going to be a summer effort? And it is going to be a summer effort. And how do we need to make provisions for that to take place? And so, education is just very closely tied to what happens to these children in their future. And so many of them are losing such large chunks of their education because of insecure housing, going from place to place. So we have really had conversations and are maintaining conversations to say, how can we advocate for them not to have to change their school when they become homeless? How can, theoretically, that's possible. Legally, that's possible. But realistically and logistically, it is impossible usually. So, how can we advocate for that to happen so that there's not one more delay in what's happening? So it's huge, the education piece of that. But that is the one place that if they can sustain that, if they can stay in the same school, that's continuity for them. So I feel like it's really important for us to keep trying to find that way to do that. And Shelby County Schools has embraced what we're doing here and offering assistance to make sure these students get enrolled in school and stay in that school, and then offering tutoring for those that need it. It's open to all of the children that are staying here. So it's a huge thing, and there are hundreds and hundreds of children in this city who are homeless. The numbers are staggering, and that looks in a million different ways. They may be in shelters like Room in the Inn or Dorothy Day House or Salvation Army. They may be staying temporarily in those shelters, but the majority of children in the city who are homeless are sleeping in cars every night, are sleeping in abandoned houses or abandoned buildings, or behind somebody's house, or in unsafe places. So, it's a huge issue in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's so hard to relate to that, as if you're not somebody who's gone through that. But I do think that maybe the pandemic has given some parents an eye into what that may look like. I think a lot of parents have seen the effect of doing a half a year or a full year at home, and how that much different changes their students' learning, their social emotional progress, and all of those things. But imagine that, maybe you're not even learning from home. You're taking months at a time at a gap, or you're transitioning between 3, 4, 5 schools in a year. Going through that is just so difficult for students. And like we've talked about, education is a huge thing to getting forward in the world. A lot of jobs require not only just a high school degree, but a bachelor degree these days. And if you get caught behind in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, there's a chance that you may just stay behind. So again, the work that you guys are doing, providing those wraparound services is really, really incredible. Well, we're getting into the last 10 or 15 minutes of the conversation here. And so I do want to see if you guys have any advice that you would give to people who are discerning their next steps, who have seminary as something in mind. Is seminary something that they should pursue if they're passionate about this topic, housing justice? And maybe has seminary impacted you in the work that you do in this area of justice?
I can start with that. Of course, I'm very biased being the dean here at Memphis Theological Seminary, but I just know my own experience when I was in seminary and seeing how students have been affected here, is that this is really hard work. It's emotionally and spiritually draining work to come to know the human suffering and loss and grief that people are wrestling with related to loss of housing, and then the myriad of other issues that can be around that. It's hard work. And you don't stay in this work for very long if you don't have a solid spiritual foundation and strong theological convictions about the importance and the necessity of continuing in this work. So getting that kind of spiritual foundation and that kind of theological vision is what can happen in seminary. It's not the only place where it can happen, but seminary can provide a kind of focused journey for a few years at least that can kind of set the tone for the way in which one does this kind of work, any kind of justice work going forward. And so, at Memphis Theological Seminary, I think is particularly well placed to help people with that kind of foundational work because all of the professors here are practitioners. None of us are just kind of ivory tower theologians. We are theologians in the streets. Working with nonprofits, working with congregations. So we're able to connect students to places where they can get introduced into this kind of work. But there are places like Room in the Inn where the people who are directing the organization are themselves people of faith who know the struggle and know the necessity of a strong life of faith to continue in the struggle. So I'd say that folks who are considering where to go to seminary is ask when you inquire, are your faculty engaged with justice work? And not in just a kind of theoretical level like writing books about it, important as that is, but that they're actually engaged with community organizations that are doing the work. And if they are, great. And there are seminaries, MTS isn't the only seminary in the world that does this, but there are very few that have an entire faculty doing it. And we are one of those places. And so I would, humbly urge you to consider Memphis Theological Seminary as a place where you can get that foundational work integrated with the work of justice.
Well, I definitely am biased also because it is the place that instilled that in me. My first experience with any sort of homeless ministry, those very first experiences were because of a class at MTS. It changed my way of looking at the world, and to have the practical experience that then in the classroom was unpacked for me theologically and practically, and also impacted the way I saw how the church should live in the world and be involved in justice issues. And so in every part of my life, I think, personally, but also professionally, my preaching is different because of my interactions at MTS. My listening to preachers is different. My openness to hearing other people's stories is because of that place that taught me to listen closely to other people's ideas and stories and where they come from. And I think that having a seminary that is smack in the middle of an urban area is a huge advantage for people who are going out into the world. Of course, there are rural churches that people will be serving, but to be able to bring that experience with the justice issues that are just part of the DNA in Memphis to those areas, I think can change even those places that are not in cities. I think that's one of the beauties of MTS, is that it is a living, breathing workshop of ministry in so many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we hear this term bivocational a lot to describe our professors, but I like to say bivocational because our professors are doing so many different things and being so integrated into the community, and that plays out in the classroom, as you've heard today. You're doing practical hands-on work, whether you're doing the master's program or the DMin program. Our doctorate program has a component in almost every single one where there's an immersion residency where you're going out into the Memphis community and learning directly hands-on from people who are doing that work, who are on the ground working for it. So want to really thank you guys for joining us this afternoon. It has been such a wonderful conversation. The work that you are both doing is obviously very different, but is very impactful. There's so many different ways to impact people who are experiencing homelessness, whether it's a place like Manna House providing a safe place to stay, showers, food, or a room in the inn where it's housing, wraparound services, and so on and so forth. So hopefully those of us who are on Facebook will stick with us for just a few minutes. I want to share my screen and let everybody know how to interact with MTS, our admissions office, how to apply, and so on and so forth. But do want to thank our panelists again for joining us. And if you guys need to head out, that's fine. Or if you guys want to stick around for the application process, that's great too. But thank you guys again, and especially thank you for the work that you do in our community.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen with everybody here, and what you guys will see in just a second is our website, memphisseminary.edu. You can find this either by, again, just going to memphisseminary.edu or typing Memphis Theological Seminary into Google. I want to show you guys a couple of different resources on our website. First of all, if you'd like to learn more about our seminary, there are so many different ways to do it. Go ahead and click the Schedule a Visit page up at the top, and what you will see is a plethora of options to engage with us. You can come and schedule a visit, come to campus, and we'll talk with you in person about our degree programs, answer any questions that you might have, or you can do it virtually. Maybe you're in a different city, maybe you just don't have the capacity to come to campus right now. Schedule a virtual visit and we'll do a Zoom or a phone call with you guys, and again, answer any questions that you might have. If you'd rather us reach out to you, you can hit this request information button and just fill out a little bit of information about yourself, and our admissions team will get back to you within a day or two so that we can have a conversation about our wonderful seminary and programs. You can get a virtual campus tour if you're unable to come see us in person. And we do have a really wonderful event going on next Monday. If you're interested in our master degrees, we will be having a preview day. It'll be from 5 to 7 p.m. Central Time. It is a virtual event, so if you're interested in RSVPing, you would just click here. If you're able to attend, you'll get to sit in on an MTS class, and hear everything about MTS and the admissions process from our admissions team. So it's a really wonderful way to dive into the MTS process and see if this is the right place for you. I also want to shout out our final day of Social Justice Week tomorrow. We will be talking about how MTS and social justice work together, especially as it relates to our curriculum. I'll be bringing back Dr. Gacky to talk on that tomorrow, and we're really excited to dive into that subject. And then I also did want to just briefly shout out our YouTube page. This is a really helpful resource because we take all of our videos live, or the chapel services that we do, and we put them up here so that students can watch them later on. So what you'll see is, for example, we've done a virtual information session about all 5 of the Doctorate of Ministry programs that we'll be doing in 2022, and you can find all of those uploaded here. Watch them, learn about the degree programs, and then again, you know how to reach back out to us. I want to thank everybody so much for joining us this afternoon. It has been such a wonderful week so far for Social Justice Week. We're really excited for our final event tomorrow. And if you missed any of the other ones, please just scroll down our Facebook page and you can watch our conversation on racial justice, food justice, and educational justice. Well, see you guys tomorrow, and y'all have a wonderful day.